Mhm. So, Briana, my question for you is what are some of the things that people come to you believing about coaching that you wished you could dispel, like some of the myths about coaching that are out there?
Are you speaking as like when clients come to me or folks who are considering becoming a coach? And I'll say they're similar myths, I think, but
I
just
guess
to,
like dinner party, like when you're at the dinner party and you're like, I'm a coach or I teach people how to become coaches, like what is the average person carrying around about coaching?
yeah, I feel like the first piece, there's just a basic not knowing of what does that even mean. Often I'll be like, oh, like a life coach, which life coach is just such a big term. And I think it is the most known term. But coaching is so, it is vast, and there are so many kind of niches or specializations that one can have. And I think when we say life coach, that gets kind of dispersed in a way that starts to lose meaning for people, for some people to kind of understand, like, what do you mean life coach? So a lot of people think, for example, like you need to have a background in whatever your client's work is. So for example, an idea that like I can only coach an engineer if I have engineering experience or background or understanding. Um, and that's not true. Definitely not true. It might be helpful depending on what that client's like main goal is, but it also might get in the way of real true coaching if I'm coming in with my own biases about what it means to be an engineer, whereas it really like allows me to hold that really broad, really connected to the person kind of curiosity that's really central to the coaching process. So
feel
that's
like
one. Curious what you.
this came up for me around the term executive coaching because I feel like that term gets thrown around a lot and people who are kind of in executive leadership roles, I think often end up eventually in coaching. Um, but I also think there's a lot of people out there who are doing some kind of executive leadership coaching in the business world who are actually consultants.
Mhm.
And so I don't think that helps dispel the myth, right? Because there's people out there who say, I know how to run a team or a busy organization, and I did it successfully for many years, and I'm going to coach you on how to do that. And I think what they really mean is I'm going to advise you. Um,
Mhm.
and then on the other hand, there are people who they were successful at that because they were living in a really values aligned, clear way, which is the gift of coaching, right? And that they're actually providing that sort of co-creative dialogue that's helping people get clear and helping people understand what are my limiting beliefs, what's kind of underneath this issue for me. But I think it's really muddy. And I know I had a lot of imposter syndrome, especially when I first started coaching. I was a pretty young professional and I had to coach some people who were running really large organizations that were like companies I had heard of. And I was like, what do I have to offer this person? And I'm curious what you would say to past me who has that imposter syndrome and is thinking about I don't have my own life figured out. So how could I be a life coach or an executive coach? Or I know our preferred term is just coach, but how can I do that when I don't have my own life sort of perfect?
That is such a key, important question. And I think I similarly, I started coaching as a young professional and had very similar imposter syndrome feelings. And, you know, now 10 years in to this work, what I know is that um, it's it is about a coaching presence and a certain skill set that you are bringing as a coach, that you have cultivated as a coach, that is deep curiosity, an ability to sort of see through story and help clients surface what's underneath a dynamic in their life or maybe blocking them from accessing their own creativity in a certain experience. And that this skill of that particular skill of being able to support someone on their journey of reflection and practice in their lives is a skill that can support folks in many, many, many different realms of their life. People coming in for executive coaching, executives are really good at what they're doing, but they may need that support to sit back and really see what is under the surface. And the coach has the skill to lead them through that process that the executive themselves or the person of whatever kind of career background isn't the muscle that they're working all the time. And so really starting to appreciate and trust and value the process and skill set that is coaching as its own realm of expertise. And it is not an expertise of giving advice. It's an expertise of supporting people in that journey of reflection and action in ways that support them to live in more alignment with their values, to get more clarity, so that they can come up with the answers for their specific problem. Whereas if I'm coming in thinking I need to have been an executive, then behind that belief is I need to have the answers for the person in front of me. But as a coach, that's actually not a helpful belief. I need to know that my client has the answers and that I can help them get there. And I think that distinction is really important when we think about what do I have to offer? And am I giving advice or am I coaching?
Hmm.
Curious what that, yeah, what you would say to that and what that brings up for you.
I feel like what that brings up for me, hearing you speak about that is the idea actually of therapy, and I know there's obviously like a clear ethical line between where coaching ends and therapy begins. But I feel like therapy is a good example of a skill set that we know it's like mental health support. And so I think someone would be less likely to question a young therapist, because like somebody who is a therapist has studied counseling and psychology, and they've gone through this process and they're skilled at supporting mental health. And so everything from maybe a crisis to helping someone develop coping skills for certain things. And so I'm thinking like in that way, coaching has more in common with therapy than it does with consulting or even like mentorship and advising, because it's not about me coming from a place of my experience. It's about me having a set of like human skills that are supporting you. And so, there is that distinction between coaching and therapy, where coaching, it's more present and future focused. There's not necessarily the level of like psychoeducation or getting into past trauma that happens in therapy. And it's not, designed for like acute situations the way that therapy might be. But a coach in many ways, and I'll be honest, like in many ways, coaching resonates more with me than therapy. They obviously have sometimes different uses, but this idea of not pathologizing the client really resonates with me. So this idea that we're already, creative, resourceful, and whole, those are the words that we use in the coaching world. We're not necessarily like needing to be fixed, but it's part of the human experience to need to work through something with another human. And obviously, we have friends, and our friends might give us advice, but the role of the coach is really to come in with those skills to help you surface the thing, get under the surface of the thing, and identify things like patterns or habits, behaviors, etc., that might be, in your world. And to do it sometimes in a really laser focused way, right? We usually bring just one thing to coaching, and that's not necessarily like a relationship with a parent. It's usually much more focused. And sometimes we spend time getting to that focus at the beginning of the session. I know for me, it's hard to explain when someone hasn't experienced coaching, like with the dinner party guest, it's like, well, you should just try it out. Like watch a coaching demonstration or try being coached or just like get a taste to understand what it is. Because I think when people don't have that taste, or maybe they've been coached in a way that doesn't really align with the approach you and I are talking about, I think it can make it a little bit confusing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely something I think should be experienced to understand and also to experience different coaches and different coaching styles. Again, there are so many different ways folks approach coaching. But also, I do want to highlight one thing you named in kind of the distinction between coaching and therapy there too is where therapists may provide a lot of psychoeducation. That is also a way in which a therapist is um, positioned as expert in a certain way that coaches are still not positioned as expert, right? So a therapist is coming in with psychoeducation that they may tell or teach to a client in order to support the client in their healing or their growth. A coach, we understand behavior change, for example. That's part of the study of becoming a coach is understanding things like how people learn and grow and change um, in alignment with values. But most often we won't be spending time positioning ourselves as expert, explaining how these things work to a client. It's very experiential in how the process of coaching itself can support that client again to access that creative, resourceful, whole parts of themselves. And as you said, it's very much a felt experience, and so tailored to the client in front of you as a coach that it is hard to kind of put into words when talking to someone at a dinner party. And I also want to go back to something you said earlier around like, oh, I have to have my life together in order to be a coach. There's that I think is like every coach's kind of inner imposter syndrome can resonate with that in many ways. But I think at the same time, one of the most central parts of being a coach is honoring our humanness. And a part of that is as you're learning, as you're training as a coach, and then as you're working as a coach, a commitment we have is constant self-reflection, development, being really engaged with our own inner work as well, so that when those things come up, we are attuned to how they might show up in our relationships to clients, but also um, when our own inner critic comes in, are we always going to be perfect at not letting our own inner critic influence us? No, we're human. Everyone at some point has an inner critic, and everyone at some point is going to let that impact them in some way because that's being human. Am I super great at creating routines for myself that, like, maybe I helped a client come up with a routine for themselves in some way? No, but maybe that's not my goal. Doesn't mean I can't support a client in that. I don't have to be perfect because if I were perfect, and sometimes again, this myth that like, and I see this a lot with social media coaching, like my life is great and perfect and I have everything together and you can be like me if you work with me. That is not what we're about with coaching. We want to say, hey, we're all human. We're all going to be grappling with these different challenges in our life throughout time. And it's a continuous process of checking in and growing and realigning throughout our lives. How do we build the skills so that we can keep developing in these ways, both ourselves as coaches, but also how our clients, in alignment with their life goals and their values, continuing to find ways to flex that muscle, build those skills so that when they're out of alignment, they notice and they can start stepping in rather than we're going to have everything just perfect after this session.
Yeah, I'm really struck by how you're talking about ways of being as a coach as verbs, like realigning. It's this responsive and dynamic skill set. And that's what we're cultivating for our lives. Whereas when we say, I want to have my life together or perfect, it's almost like a static destination. And that's not life. That's death. Like that's comes later, hopefully. So there's this like idea of perfection or somewhere I'm supposed to get that is perfect. And actually, like, I think what makes us the best coaches is exactly, Brianna, what you named, which is like our imperfection as humans make us able to show up for other humans. And that's why, like, this job can't be done by AI. Like when you think about something that is perfect and always responding without, first of all, AI is not without bias. It's just not maybe as skilled as hopefully our coaches are at recognizing and understanding how bias comes into play. Um, but this job needs to be done by a human being, right? Who is sitting across from another human being and really showing up in a flawed human way. So, I mean, I would tell someone who's like, well, I can't be a life coach because I haven't figured out my life. If you're interested in the process of figuring out your life, which, like any good coach, is usually in a constant state of that process of figuring things out, because it's always changing. Like, that process is what coaching is all about. So if you're skilled at thinking about those questions for yourself or noticing the things that come up for yourself, that's really like the heart of the self-regulation and self-observation that happens as a coach of like, wow, I'm noticing myself really wanting to fix this person's problem or jump in with a suggestion. And I'm holding back. And I'm just gonna like take a breath and ask them to tell me more about it. That's how we self-regulate as a coach. Um, yeah, but like the flaws, yeah, how do I put this? I've been thinking a lot about AI. When you read a book, the flaws of the characters are what make them interesting. Or when you watch a movie, right? It's the flaws of the characters that make them relatable too. And so we want clients to feel like they can relate to us, like they can connect to us. And if we are perfect and we're like, look at me, my life is perfect, that's not very relatable at all.
Yeah, I love what you're naming here with the relatable piece and also just that sorry, I have a oh, my dog is running away. Hold on a second. I had to pause.
Yay, Brianna's back. Everything okay with your dog?
Yeah, she's fine. She was just getting out.
All right. Okay, so in summary, coaches should not be perfect. We should be, that means anyone who's in like total chaos is a total mess. No, I'm kidding. Um, yeah, what I guess maybe as a last question, what is like one thing that you wish people knew about coaching that you feel like they get wrong about coaching?
One thing to kind of close it out. Hmm. I think this idea that the coach is the expert, that you're gonna get your exact answer to your problem from your coach. I think that, something that I really like to anchor into and brings me a lot of joy in coaching is that I look at coaching as developmental, where it's this idea of not just like the problem in front of me. Like you might be working with us, like there's something that brought someone to coaching, right? I, I need I want to advance my career and I feel like I need to work on my confidence. That's the one thing that they came in and that's maybe like the focus, but that what we're really working on is not how are we going to address this one thing in front of us right now? How are we going to work with that? And also look to the next thing, the next challenge that comes up, the next challenge. How are you developing yourself, your skills, um, uh, your capacity, your awareness to be able to address whatever life brings you through the lens of addressing the thing that's in front of you right now. And I think that that's important to see because it's just such a ripple effect of impact that when you coach or if you decide to be coached, that the ripple effect of your life it can just be massive. And part of that is, of course, honoring our humanness and the dynamic nature of our lives and getting out of our own way. Um, and that again, coaching is just such a unique way to access those parts of ourselves.
Hmm.
I don't know what would you say?
I might just add that I feel like the skills, rather than sort of being an expert at leadership or an expert at life, these giant things, the people who come in to coaching who are like maybe naturally skilled when they start, I think the people I see really taking to it, one are educators, people who have been teachers or educators. I think often because they're coming from that developmental space, they've already built up some muscles, and they just need to translate, from kind of one medium to another. People who are like healers, whether it's a counselor, a social worker, somebody who's sort of dealing with humans on a regular basis, and has a lot of skill around active listening. Those folks tend to do really well with coaching. Um, Sometimes team managers, although I say like I wish more managers had coaching skills, it really depends on the person. But I think like the educators and healers that I know tend to be two categories of people, and then sort of like social activists, whether they're doing advocacy for people, people who are doing kind of interpersonal work. That tends to translate really well to coaching. So if you're coming from one of those fields, I feel like you already have a lot of the building blocks that you can take and apply to become a coach. So if you have that imposter syndrome of like, oh, I haven't figured out my life, but you're doing one of those things, then you're already kind of well on your way to developing skills to be a coach.
Beautifully said.
All
Thanks,
right.
Jenny.
Thanks. Bye, Briana.
Bye.